Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. CFL Week 7 is upon us. And finally, we're back to a 4-game slate, the way it should be, with 8 teams in action and only 1 team on the bye. That's the way it should be. And that team on the bye week is the Edmonton Elks. So we will briefly talk about the Edmonton Elks, as we like to do on this show before we get into each game. We do like to give a little opportunity to spotlight the team that's on the bye week. I don't know if we should be spotlighting anything to do with the Edmonton Elks right now, the way they're playing, but nevertheless, we will. If you want to know why the Edmonton Elks have been a loser franchise for the last few years, all you have to do is look at the fact that you came off, obviously, the week before, a very, very good performance, especially on offense, and a victory over the Ottawa Red Blacks to get your first win of the season, to maybe start making you think that, hey, maybe things are looking upward for the Edmonton Elks. And then all of a sudden we see last week against BC, you couldn't have played worse, really, on either side of the football in that 32-14 beatdown at the hands of the BC Lions. So all that goodwill, all that momentum you were maybe starting to build with the win against Ottawa, you give it all right back in losing to the BC Lions right after that. And it was domination. But the final score, believe it or not, could have been a little bit flattering to Edmonton because the time of possession was insane. You know, over 40 minutes, the BC Lions had the football in that game, and they just did a masterful job just moving the chains, keeping the Edmonton offense off the field. And when Edmonton was on the field, it was a disaster. And I talked about, too, a big part of how Edmonton was able to build up some of that momentum from the Ottawa win was because I thought Trey Ford was really showing positive progression as a starting quarterback. I thought even in a loss to Winnipeg, he played all right. And I thought he played probably his best game against Ottawa a couple weeks ago. And he followed that up with an absolutely horrific performance. You cannot sugarcoat it. It was a terrible, terrible game for Trey Ford. And right away, the tone was set when he had a wide open receiver down the field, Dunbar, and just a brutal underthrow. Didn't get enough on it, allows the defensive back, I believe it was Gary Peters, to undercut it and intercept it. And right away, you say he had a touchdown there. If you just put that ball where it needs to be and throw it right accurately for the receiver, you got 7 points there. You got a touchdown. He didn't. Accuracy at times is still an issue for Trey Ford, and there was no bigger example of that than that first interception in that game against BC last week. And it really only went downhill from there. He also missed a wide open receiver running a bit of a sideline route down the field later in the game. Wide open he was, and just missed him. He was missing wide open receivers. And I know on the broadcast on TSN at halftime, Davis Sanchez and the crew, they talked about it. You know, when the scheme is drawn up perfectly and these receivers get open and they create separation down the field against the secondary, and they've got clear green in front of them and no defender around them, those are the throws you got to make. Those are the throws you got to be accurate and hit them. And you got to make those throws 9, if not 10 out of 10 times. And Trey Ford, time in and time out last week, missed those throws. And now the heat's on, for Edmonton. They took a huge step back after the big win against Ottawa. Their defense was horrible. They could not stop Nathan Rourke and the Lions. And now there's more soul searching going on all over again, where it was looking like things are pointing up with the 1-3 record after the Ottawa win, and now going into their bye week on a horrific performance, laying an egg, now back to 1-4. All the questions are being asked again. Is this defense any good? Is Trey Ford going to get benched for former Grey Cup champion Cody Fajardo? So there's a lot of questions. And Mark Killam said at the very beginning of the season, we are committing to Trey Ford. He's our quarterback. He's going to get an opportunity and the rope and the leeway to struggle and lose games, and we're not going to pull the rug out from under him. We're going to stick with him and give him the chance to ride it out. This is going to be the ultimate test of that, because you're 1-4. He took a huge step back in his performance against BC after improvement, I thought, each of the 2 weeks before that. And you have a veteran quarterback who's won a Grey Cup waiting in the wings. Not easy to not make the change at quarterback, if you ask me, following that game. But again, it's up. I'm not the coach. I'm not getting paid by the Edmonton Elks. Mark Killam is. So it's going to be up to Mark Killam to make that decision at the end of the day, and it's a big one. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And I don't know what they have to do something about this defense. Like they literally cannot stop anybody. You look at the points they've given. They have not kept a team below 32 points this year. That is absolutely abysmal. 31 points rather is the lowest point total allowed by this Edmonton defense, and that was week 1 against BC. They've given up 31, 38, 36, 33, and 32 points in their 5 games. You can't win games that way. This defense is bad. There's no pass rush. The secondary is lost. They can't cover receivers down the field. There's receivers running wide open. And now to make matters worse, and the one guy I thought all year was playing pretty well on that defense, Jake Serezna, he gets injured against BC, and he's out, at least a few weeks. And now, apparently, they avoided the worst of it. It could have been maybe season ending, but they're still going to be without him, I would say, for at least a couple of games. And that's the last thing Edmonton's struggling defense needs. One of the few really good players that they've had on that defense getting hurt. So all kinds of issues for Edmonton, and we'll see how they come out of it following their bye week. All right, let's get into week 7. We will begin with the Thursday nighter, the Toronto Argonauts and the Montreal Alouettes. Montreal 10-point home favorites, 51 the total. These teams already played once this year. It was week 1, 28-10 Montreal. It was pretty much domination by the Montreal Alouettes in that game, first game of the season. They were in pretty much control start to finish. The defense was terrific. They completely put the clamps down for the most part on Nick Arbuckle and the Argos offense. And because of the way the injury situation has unfolded, we're going to have the exact same quarterback matchup here in this game between the Argos and Alouettes as we did in week 1, where it will be Nick Arbuckle once again for the Argos, with Chad Kelly still not able to return. Ryan Dinwiddie weeks ago told the media he was hoping after the bye week in week 7 that Chad Kelly would be able to suit up again for the Argos, but that is not the case. And instead, it'll be Nick Arbuckle once again at quarterback here for the Argos, coming off the bye week. And he did not fare well against this Montreal defense in that first meeting. That being said, the Saskatchewan game, they put up 32 points. Now, the Ottawa game, they kind of struggled on offense. Don't forget the 29 points in that victory for the Argos. Their only victory was 2 non-offensive touchdowns by the same guy, a defensive touchdown and a special teams touchdown by Derek Sluka, the Sluka game, as I like to call it. So that 29 points they scored against Ottawa is a little bit misleading, especially from an offensive standpoint. Now, even the Hamilton game where, they put up 38 points. Well, Hamilton was scoring on every drive against that Toronto defense. And I kind of think it played into the way Hamilton went about it on defense, where they weren't as aggressive. They were kind of sitting back, giving Toronto all the underneath stuff, and just letting them methodically move that ball down the field, take time off the clock. And that's why the yardage and the points ended up being so massive for Toronto. That being said, there has been improvement in this offense, and for Nick Arbuckle, he's definitely been throwing the ball a little bit better. But this is not going to be easy. I mean, this is still excellent, in my opinion. I think there's a top 2, top 3 defense in the CFL, Montreal. You look at the losses against Hamilton and BC. Again, a little bit of a misleading score against the Ticats, my Ticats, 35-17, where what happened to the Montreal defense? Well, there were 2 defensive touchdowns by Hamilton in that game. There's a pick 6 by Devin Varasek, the rookie linebacker, off McLeod Bethel Thompson. And you remember Bethel Thompson got sacked, fumbled, lost the football right by his own goal line, and Hamilton scooped and scored in the end zone, recovered it for a touchdown. That was another defensive touchdown. So if you take those 2 touchdowns away, it really wasn't that bad of a performance from Montreal's defense, even in the loss against Hamilton. And then, of course, the loss against BC, I thought they played pretty solid most of the game. It took a while for the Lions had to earn everything they got. But the problem was McLeod Bethel Thompson and the Montreal offense sputtered. They didn't finish drives with touchdowns. And then BC ends up getting a gift 15-yard penalty just a bonehead decision, roughness after a roughing penalty after the play, after the whistle on the extra point or after the touchdown, and it set BC up when they were trailing late in that game with great field position. I didn't love the way Montreal played that final snap from scrimmage where Nathan Rourke got all kinds of cushion to find an open receiver 10 yards down the field to give Sean White the field goal range that he needed to win that game. But overall, the Montreal defense didn't play that bad, even in the 2 losses that they suffered this season. And the big news for Toronto, now there is some good news for them. Obviously on offense, there's still a lot of injuries. How about the crazy thing with Ryan Hunter? Ends up getting hit by in a car accident and ends up being out now 6 to 8 weeks. Terrible to hear that. And he had been one of their better offensive linemen this year. So not good for the Argos. Certainly the offensive line will take a hit with that. The good news is on defense, they do get reinforcements. Derek Parrish, who's a big force on the D-line, is back. And most importantly of all, their all-world linebacker, Wynton McManus, the best player on this Toronto defense, back from injury after missing the last few weeks. So that will help this Toronto defense and make things at least a little bit more difficult for a returning Davis Alexander. 7-0 as a starter, back in the fold. 3-0 this year, the Alouettes. 3-0, not only 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread, and 3 double-digit victories for the Montreal Alouettes with Davis Alexander starting at quarterback this year. So the offense has been just night and day different with him compared to MBT. And don't forget, there's a ton of receivers here. There's Speaker, there's Rambo, there's Tyson Philpott, who I believe is going to play. There was some worry early in the week about his not practicing, but Jason Moss said he's probably going to be still ready to go. And, of course, Austin Mack, who has also missed some time along with his quarterback, Davis Alexander. Austin Mack is returning as well for this game tonight. So here's the problem, guys. Montreal was a very strong opinion for yours truly. And I took it right when I saw the open -4.5 because I figured the line would have to go up. But I only betted a quarter unit because I still wanted to wait and see what the injury report was going to be later in the week. And unfortunately, the betting markets didn't wait around because Monday morning into Monday early afternoon, that line was already moving up to 6.5, 7. And then there was a second big move after that from 7 all the way up to 8.5, 9, and then up to 10 eventually where it is now. And so, yeah, I like Montreal in this game. I think they win. I think they got a good chance to cover. I lean that way still, even at -10, because Montreal's 3 victories this year with Davis Alexander were double-digit wins, including the win against Toronto in week 1 against this very same quarterback, Nick Arbuckle. They won 28-10. I mean, I don't want Toronto. Toronto's got too many issues, and I don't want to bet against Montreal at home off 2 very, very disheartening losses in a row, off a bye week. I think they're going to come out, chomping at the bit, full focus, intensity, really play a strong game tonight, and I think it's going to be too much for Toronto. The problem is I'm not going to be the guy on this show that's going to say when there was 4.5 early in the week, go bet Montreal now -10. I can't do it. I won't do that. It's not right. That's not proper. That's not the way to go about this if you want to win long term. And so get creative maybe. Maybe Argos team total under, maybe Alouettes team total over. Maybe if you want to, instead of laying the 10, maybe you take Montreal first half. You'll at least get that first half point spread below a touchdown here in this game at -6.5. You could go about it that way as well. Yeah, I really, really like Montreal here, but unfortunately, the number's gone. The ship has sailed. And at this point, I would say, get creative if you want to take Montreal or maybe just sit this one out. The total could go either way with me. I'll say this, though. I find Montreal will be more of an over team with Davis Alexander at quarterback just because he's so much better, in my opinion, than MBT. But I worry about, as far as this total, because I think Montreal will score. Can Toronto score enough to hold serve here, if you will? Remember, they only scored 10 against Toronto in week 1 with Arbuckle, and that game stayed under even though Montreal scored 28. So Montreal got theirs, but they shut down the Toronto offense. So that's my concern with the under. I lean over here, but like I said, I do worry a little bit about what Toronto if Toronto can hold up their end of the bargain as far as moving the football here on offense against a Montreal defense that I think would not surprise me if they play a pretty good game here tonight. All right, Friday night football tonight. Yes, and it is a good one. It's probably the game of the week on paper. Calgary and Winnipeg. Winnipeg 3.5-point home favorites. 50 the total. Princess Auto Stadium here in Winnipeg. A rematch of just 2 weeks ago when Calgary at McMahon Stadium in the Stampede Bowl, as it was billed, not just beat Winnipeg, they dominated Winnipeg. 37-16, not one, but two pick sixes and defensive touchdowns for Calgary in that game against Zach Collaros. They just ran roughshod over this Winnipeg Blue Bombers team. Vernon Adams was very solid. Some big plays were made down the field as well. Look, Calgary was the worst. You could make a case they were one of the worst teams, surely, in the CFL last year. And I thought just because Vernon Adams is now the quarterback and not Jake Mayer, at least on offense, that's going to make this team better. But I did not see 4-1 out of the gate to start the season coming for the Calgary Stampeders. And a reason why is because I thought this defense was still going to be very bad. You know, it was a horrible defense last year. Dave Dickinson made no secret of the fact that this defense was going to have so many new faces on it coming into this season. I thought they were a bad defense last year. Now you're bringing in 75, 80% new players at every position. How are you going to be good on defense? And what we have seen so far from them on the defensive side of the football has been pretty damn remarkable, what they've been able to do. Beating Hamilton, and we saw Bo Levi Mitchell and the Ticats have a okay but not great game. And at that point, I was like, what the hell's wrong with Hamilton's offense? Well, maybe I wasn't giving enough credit to Calgary's defense after that first game, especially when you see the way they've played since then. They shut down Toronto. The loss against Ottawa, I think that was probably their worst game on defense, but the weather was so bad, and it probably took away a lot from what Calgary could do in the passing game. And with Dustin Crum at quarterback for Ottawa that day, it set up perfectly for them because he's not a great pocket passer anyway. If it's a run-heavy offense in a bad weather, it's probably good for Ottawa. So that played a role in that Calgary loss. But the way they have played defense these last two games, beating the other two top teams in the West Division, Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, holding them to 16 and 10 points, 26 points combined. Zach Collaros and Trevor Harris. That's impressive. That, to me, is enough to say, you know what, we got to upgrade this defense, that they are playing well. Even with all the new faces, they are playing like one of the best defenses so far, at least, in the CFL. And this number stayed around the 3.5. In fact, it was 4.5 initially, and it moved down a little. So there was some early week money on Calgary. And I get it. Calgary's 4-1 straight up, 4-1 against the spread. They've looked awesome. The only loss was that inclement weather game against Ottawa. Their defense actually looks like it's getting better every week. Vernon Adams is finding chemistry with his receivers. Dedrick Mills is running the ball. How do you want to bet against this team? It's not easy to. I'll be the first to admit it's not easy to say, yeah, let's place a bet against the Calgary Stampeders right now. It's very difficult. All that being said, this is the sweet spot of a lifetime for Winnipeg when you think about it. They got their asses beat by this Calgary team just 2 weeks ago. They haven't played since. They haven't played since that 37-16 loss at Calgary. They're coming off a bye week, the extra time to prepare. They've been historically a very good team off a bye under O'Shea. They've been obviously phenomenal at home. 43-6 is the straight-up record for Winnipeg at home since 2019. And they're only laying 3.5. And as impressive as Calgary's been, here's the thing about this spot that I worry about. Winnipeg at home, big game. You got up for it. Saskatchewan on the road, first place battle, big game. You got up for it. Not only got up for it, you had to get up for it twice because you were supposed to play Friday night. Game gets postponed after 4-hour delay because of poor air quality. It gets pushed to Saturday afternoon, so you got to stick around for another day, play a Saturday game, and the reverberating effect of that is it makes this a short week. You're going from a Saturday game to a Friday game. And that was a big game. And now you got to ramp up the batteries again, recharge the batteries, refuel for a third straight big-time game in your own division. Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, now Winnipeg again, this time on the road, and a second straight road game, too, after being in Saskatchewan last week, and a little bit of a short week now. That's a troubling spot to me. It's a huge situational scheduling advantage for Winnipeg. There's no way around it. It absolutely is a big advantage in the scheduling dynamics here for Winnipeg. So while it's difficult to bet against Calgary, there's a lot of reasons to say there's a great spot for Winnipeg, and I kind of lean in that direction with Winnipeg. -3. What I'll probably do, look, I don't want to go crazy on this because I really like what I'm seeing out of Calgary. Like, I can't make this best bet material. But now with the threes that were starting to show up toward Winnipeg and a money line that got to as low as -170, I did a bit of a small bet split with Winnipeg -170 money line and the -3. I just think, they're a really, let's not forget, even though Winnipeg got bombed by Calgary, that's still a very good Winnipeg team. They're awesome at home. They're already 2-0 at home this year. They've also dominated Calgary here in Winnipeg. Winnipeg has won and covered, or not cut. They're 4-0 straight up, 3-1 against the spread the last 4 times they've hosted Calgary as well. Look, if Calgary goes to 5-1, goes into Winnipeg and beats them again for a second time in 3 weeks, I'll tip the cap and say, wow, awesome job. Great. Well done, Dave Dickinson. Well done, Vernon Adams. Well done, defense. Well done, everybody. But I think this is just a little bit difficult to ask for Calgary. And Winnipeg, is going to have that 37-16 loss in the back of their minds, preparing for this game and a second shot at this Calgary Stampeders team. So Winnipeg or nothing for me. In this one. Total could stay under because, look, Calgary's been an under machine. And I was fortunate to cash the over in the first meeting in Calgary only because of a late touchdown by Winnipeg. But I could see this maybe being, it's hard to bet Calgary overs right now. They've gone under in 3 of the last 4. The defense is playing great. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Vernon Adams on the road here in a hostile environment. It'll be loud every time the Stamps offense is on the field to move the ball. So could this be an under? Yeah, perhaps. We'll see if it plays out to be a lower scoring game there. All right, we got Saskatchewan, BC. BC 2.5-point favorites at home, 52.5 the total. This game is on Saturday. There was some concern early in the week about Saskatchewan's secondary. Marcus Sayles, Roland Milligan Jr., Tevin Campbell, all of them sat out practice early in the week, but it looks like they're all back at practice and trending toward playing Saturday. So it could be good news, in fact, for the Saskatchewan secondary. That being said, they're running into a BC offense that might be starting to get their rhythm going, and especially Nathan Rourke. Now, I know it was Edmonton, but he played a phenomenal game last week, and I thought he got better and better later in the game against Montreal, leading the Lions back from a deficit to beat the Alouettes the week before that. They're 2-0 straight up, 2-0 against the spread with Nathan Rourke back after the 3-game losing streak. That being said, they beat Montreal with McLeod Bethel-Thompson. They beat Edmonton, and Edmonton's Edmonton. They're not a good football team. So, yes, they have 2 wins in a row, but one was against a bad team, and one was against a team that played a backup quarterback. So, I'm not ready to say BC's a great team just yet, but no, the arrow's pointing up for Buck Pierce and his team. There's no question. I think the defense is starting to play a little bit better as well. They've got pieces there. They got Matthew Betts. They've got Sione Tehema. They've got Covington. They got some guys on the D line that can disrupt things along the line of scrimmage. Ben Hladek is an excellent Canadian linebacker for them. They've got a very experienced secondary, guys that can play down the field, including the veteran Gary Peters. There's pieces to make this a solid defense. We didn't see it early in the year. They did have some D-line injuries, but it's been good to see that the run defense has at least been a little bit better for BC. Remember, they were getting gashed there in a couple of games. Teams were running the football right down the BC Lions' throat. So it's been nice to see that they've kind of stemmed the tide a little bit with that run defense as of late. Saskatchewan, they're not going to go 18-0. You knew a loss was coming, and credit to Calgary. Start to finish, they were just better on both sides of the ball in that 24-10 win over the Saskatchewan Roughriders. For Saskatchewan, look, couldn't get A.J. Ouellette going. Trevor Harris was under pressure most of that game. The offense sputtered. You can tell that was not the crisp, clean Saskatchewan offense we've seen in the past. And look, the Saskatchewan defense They had their issues with V. They gave up some big plays down the field multiple times. In fact, Damian Alford hurt them. And then there was a big bomb touchdown as well given up by the Saskatchewan Roughriders, which really, I think, kind of tilted the scales in toward Calgary. Was, Saskatchewan was starting to get back into the game, and starting to, maybe get back in it when it was 17-10 at the time. And then right down the field immediately go the Calgary Stampeders, and they end up, of course, scoring that big touchdown down the field from Vernon Adams. So, like I said, it was definitely a sign that, Saskatchewan, not their best game. And I still, we'll have to see with these three players in the secondary, because I think they're all going to play. Are they all going to be 100%? That's the thing you do worry about. We saw these teams play back in June already once this year. 37-18 Saskatchewan. Now, granted, Jeremiah Masoli was at quarterback in that game, and he struggled. So now this will be a tougher challenge here for the Saskatchewan Roughriders now that they're going to be going up against Nathan Rourke. What I would say here is I think they're going to, once again, try to get A.J. Ouellette going, test the BC run defense, which has been a little bit better. Remember, Edmonton was down so much, so quickly in that game last week against BC that the BC run defense wasn't tested. You're not going to get tested with your run defense when the team's down by double digits half the game, or more than half the game, and Edmonton has to be one-dimensional and throw the football all the time because they're trailing by such a big margin. So this will be a big test here for BC, because remember, A.J. Ouellette ran them over in the first meeting in Saskatchewan. So I think Saskatchewan will have some success running the ball, and that can open things up down the field for Trevor Harris and his receivers. And look out for this Joe Robustelli, who has really stepped up. Remember, they've had some injuries. Sean Bain's been injured all year. Sam Emelis has been hurt. They've had a couple injuries in that receiving corps, Saskatchewan. But Joe Robustelli last week stepped up and was phenomenal. See if he can keep that going. I think there's points inside the dome here at BC Place on Saturday. I think this could be an over game. Put it this way, these teams got to 55 points on June 28th in a game where it didn't even have Nathan Rourke in that game, and it still went over the total with 55 points. I think Nathan Rourke and BC can move the football against the Saskatchewan defense, and I think Saskatchewan offensively, it's a bounce-back spot, in my opinion, for them here in this game against a BC defense that to me is not on the level of Calgary's, not with what my two eyes have seen so far this year. So I like points here more than either side. I like over 52.5. I will say this about the side. BC opened a slight home dog. Saskatchewan was -1 as road favorites. Now I've seen a flip of favorites. BC -2.5 across the board. If I get a +3 or better by kickoff on Saskatchewan, I'll put some Riders in pocket because I think the Riders, it's a little bit of, here's the thing with BC. While I think they're on the upward trajectory, and Nathan Rourke just makes this team so much more prolific on offense, dangerous, explosive on offense. He can run, he can throw compared to Masoli. But let's not forget, the last two wins with Rourke back, Montreal with Bethel Thompson and Edmonton. We got to cool it a little bit with BC getting too excited. Just a little bit based on who they beat the last two games. So if this hits 3 or better with Saskatchewan, I'm going to have a small play here on the Saskatchewan Roughriders at that number. All right, let's go to Sunday night to wrap up Week 7. Hamilton, Ottawa. Ticats 1.5-point road favorites, 54 the total. Same old Ottawa Red Blacks. Winnable game. You got a chance to get it done, and you don't get it done. And that's been the story of the season for this team. Other than the one win they had against Calgary in that bad weather game. That's the only win for Ottawa this year. They're now 1-5 straight up on the season. They're also winless at home here at TD Place Stadium in Ottawa. They lost 39-18 against Montreal at home, blowout loss. They lost by double digits to Toronto. That's right. Toronto's won one game this year. One game. And it was a game that, they had the Derek Sluka game, and it was against this Ottawa team. So Ottawa's 0-2 straight up and against the spread at home this year. And they were great at home last year. Now here they are with 2 home losses and winless at home entering this game. There's things that do point to Ottawa here. Revenge spot. It's hard to beat the same team 2 weeks in a row in a home-and-home series like this, and that's what Hamilton's going to try and do. The way I also see it is we can't trust Ottawa to win close games. They'll find a way to not make the play on offense or not make the stop on defense to win these close games or not make the coaching decision that makes sense because we're dealing with Bob Dice, who is firmly on the hot seat right now, especially in Ottawa. They are clamoring with maybe one more loss, especially for a coaching change. But I don't know if I want to back Hamilton to go in. Here's what's frustrating is that if Hamilton for most of that game last week looked like they maybe were going to lose that game. If they had lost last week, I was definitely going to have a very strong bet here on Hamilton. Off the loss, they're not going to lose 2 in a row to Ottawa. Now that they won that game, I don't know if I'm ready to lay points on the road with the Ticats here. But taking Ottawa to win a game, trusting Ottawa to win a game, defense is shaky. There's still some issues in the secondary. There's a little bit of injury issues there. The offensive line did get a little healthier last week, but boy, with that game on the line, that offensive line didn't hold up. It didn't. Drew Brown was under pressure. The pass rush got home. And that's something that would concern me here is that, you thought that offensive line would take a step in the right direction last week for Ottawa. It really didn't do that against, especially late in the game with the game on the line. The pocket collapsed. Hamilton's D got home, and it made life difficult for Drew Brown in the end. It's a shame because you'd like to see Ottawa have a above average offensive line. And for too long this year, because of personnel and specifically even more so because of injuries, they haven't had an above average offensive line because there is a great group of receivers here. There really is. I mean, with Hardy and Geno Lewis and Pimpleton, and they've got receivers on this Ottawa team that can make a difference. But unfortunately, the O-line has not held up well enough. We'll see how they fare here back at home. It feels like the season could just completely get away from Ottawa if they lose this game and fall to 1-6. So who knows what's going to happen to this Ottawa team, quite honestly, if they lose this game. It's got that shit could hit the fan feeling if they don't win here this week. But I don't trust them. But I don't want to back Hamilton for a second, and lay points with them on the road here. Even though we look at head-to-head, and this Hamilton team has won 8 of the last 10 versus Ottawa in the series. Ottawa has covered 3 of the last 4, though, including last week, because they were getting 5.5. They only lost by 3. What's concerning for Ottawa, too, is not only that they lost that game, which they led most of the way and they probably should have won, is that they blew a game and lost a game where Hamilton's offense didn't look that great. They were out of sync from the beginning. Bo Levi Mitchell said it. We didn't play a great game. But when the game was on the line, Bo Levi Mitchell and the offense did enough to put the ball in the end zone and win that game. Can you bank on Hamilton's offense being that lackluster again? An offense that has been, outstanding for the last few weeks prior to that Ottawa game. Can you trust that Ottawa can get Hamilton, out of sorts on offense like they did for a majority of that game last week? I don't know if I trust them to do that. You got to think Hamilton will improve on offense this week. There's just too many weapons. Kenny Lawler has been unbelievable. He's already been so good early in the season that he actually is on pace to give Milt Stiegel's single-season touchdown receptions record a run for its money if he maintains this pace. That's how good Kenny Lawler's been. Tim White has been good. Don't forget about Shamar Bridges, Keandre Smith. I mean, Turnowski. I mean, they're loaded at receiver. And Ottawa actually played a solid defensive game plan. Bo Levi Mitchell said in the postgame they switched some things up on defense, things they hadn't been doing before, and it kind of caught us off guard. Well, now you've seen those little adjustments Ottawa made, and they still beat Ottawa and found ways to execute late. I don't know if I trust that Ottawa defense to play the way they did last week, a second straight week against a very good offense. And I do think Hamilton's got a very good offense. Hamilton's defense is getting better. At home, though, I think Ottawa can move the ball. Bottom line is that game stayed under last week, 23-20. Way under the total, 43 points in the game, but there were a lot of points left on the field. Ottawa missed some opportunities. Hamilton, missed some opportunities as well. I remember there was one where they got stopped on 3rd down by the goal line. I think this game kind of goes back to that higher scoring affair that I kind of expected last week between them. So I like over 54. 53.5 is actually the best number out there for the total. I like that here for this game, over 53.5. It stayed under last week. A lot of points left on the field. I think it kind of goes the other way this week and goes over the total. Worth noting, the last time these two teams played in Ottawa, it was a 37-31 game between these two teams. So it was a very high-scoring affair. And I think after last week's under, we kind of see the pendulum swing here in the rematch, and it goes over the total, 53.5 with Hamilton and Ottawa. All right, there you have it. That is the Week 7 CFL preview on this edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Make sure you hit the like button on the way out before we wrap things up. And let's give a best bet out there before we wrap up the show. I'm going to go to that Saskatchewan BC game Saturday night. Let's go with over 52.5. Riders Lions. The first meeting at 55 points, 37-18 Saskatchewan. And don't forget, Jeremiah Masoli was quarterback that day. It's going to be a lot tougher for the Saskatchewan defense this time around. They've had some secondary guys banged up this week. I think they're all going to play, or probably a good chance they all play. But still, I think Nathan Rourke and the Lions can move the football. But I think it's a bounce back for Trevor Harris and the Riders offense against a BC defense that, look, they stopped Trey Ford, good on them, and they shut down McLeod Bethel-Thompson. Good on them. I think this will be a tougher challenge for this Lions defense. And I still have questions about their run defense. And if A.J. Ouellette, who's, I think, due for a bounce-back performance after being shut down by Calgary last week, gets going, that can open things up down the field in the passing game for Harris and the Riders. So I think both teams end up trading points. We'll go with over 52.5. Saskatchewan, BC for my best bet for CFL Week 7 on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. That's a wrap, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy CFL Week 7, and good luck, and we'll be back next week for the Week 8 CFL edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.